Polaris. I'm so excited to share with you one of my favorite books that I love reading with my daughter. This was actually a gift from Mrs. Barrymore, and so I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. This book is called The Spiffiest Giant in Town, and it's by Julia Donaldson, and the pictures are by Alex Scheffner. And while I'm reading it, I want you to think about what point or points of Polaris is the giant showing? George was a giant, the scruffiest giant in town. He always wore the same pair of old brown sandals and the same old patched up gown. I wish I wasn't the scruffiest giant in town, he said sadly. But one day, George noticed a new shop. It was full of spiffy clothes, so he bought a spiffy shirt, a spiffy pair of pants, a spiffy belt, a spiffy striped tie, some spiffy socks with diamonds on the side, and a pair of spiffy, shiny shoes. Now I'm the spiffiest giant in town, he said proudly. George left his old clothes behind in the shop. He was about to go home when he heard a sound. On the sidewalk stood a giraffe who was sniffing sadly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my neck," said the giraffe. "It's so very long and so very cold. I wish I had a long, warm scarf." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his striped tie. "It didn't match my socks anyway," he said, as he wound it around and around the giraffe's neck. "It made a wonderful scarf." "Thank you," said the giraffe. As George strode towards home, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe, but look at me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a river. On a boat stood a goat who was bleating loudly. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sail," said the goat. "It blew away in a storm. I wish I had a strong new sail for my boat." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off his new white shirt. "It kept coming untucked anyway," he said as he tied it to the mast of the goat's boat. "It made a magnificent sail." "Thank you," said the goat. George strode on singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. But look at me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a tiny ruined house. Besides the house stood a white mouse with lots of baby mice. They were all squeaking. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's our house," squeaked the mother mouse. "It burned down, and now we have nowhere to live. I wish we had a nice new house." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his shiny shoes. "It was giving me blisters anyway," he said, as the mouse and her baby scrambled inside. The shoe made a perfect home for them. "Thank you," they squeaked. George had to hop along the road now, but he didn't mind. As he hopped, he sang to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. Look at me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a campsite. Beside a tent stood a fox who was crying. "What's the matter?" asked George. "It's my sleeping bag," said the fox. "I dropped it in a puddle. I wish I had a warm, dry sleeping bag." "Cheer up," said George, and he took off one of his socks with the diamonds on the sides. "It was tickling my toes anyway," he said, as the fox snuggled into it. "It made a very fine sleeping bag." "Thank you," said the fox. George hopped on singing to himself, "My tie is a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. But look at me up and down. I'm the spiffiest giant in town." George came to a big squishy bog. Besides the bog stood a dog who was howling. What's the matter? Asked George. It's this bog, said the dog. I need to get across, but I keep getting stuck in the mud. I wish there was a safe, dry path. Cheer up, said George, and he took off his spiffy new belt. It was squeezing my tummy anyway, he said, as he laid it down over the bog. It made an excellent path. Thank you, said the dog. The wind started to blow, but George didn't mind. He hopped on singing to himself. My tie's a scarf for a cold giraffe. My shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. My shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of my socks is a bed for a fox. My belt helped a dog who was crossing a bog, but my pants are falling down. I'm the coldest giant in town. That is silly. Suddenly, George felt sad and shivery and not all that spiffy. He stood on one foot and thought, I'll have to go back to the shop and buy more clothes, he decided. He turned around and hopped all the way back to the shop. But when he got there, it was closed. Oh no, cried George. He sank down onto the sidewalk and a tear ran down his nose. He felt as sad as all the animals he had met on his way home. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a big bag with something familiar poking out the top. George took a closer look. My gown, he yelled, my dear old gown and sandals. George put them on. They felt wonderfully comfortable. I'm the coziest giant in town, he cried, and danced back home all along the road. Outside his front door stood all the animals he had helped. They were carrying an enormous present. Come on, George, they said, open it. George untied the ribbon. Inside was a beautiful gold paper crown and card. Look inside the card, George, said the animals. George put the crown on his head and opened the card. Inside it said, you gave your scarf to a cold giraffe. Your shirt's on a boat as a sail for a goat. Your shoe is a house for a little white mouse. One of your socks is a bed for a fox. Your belt helped a dog who was crossing a brown bog. So here is a very fine crown to go with the sandals and gown of the kindest giant in town. The end. I hope that you guys enjoy this book as much as I do. So think about it. What point or points of Polaris did the giant use or show in this story? I think that he showed a lot of compassion by him sharing his clothes and giving up the things he didn't actually need. And he was an active citizen, helping all of the friends in his community. What are some ways that you are also showing compassion and active citizenship right now at your home? I can't wait to hear. Comment below, let us know, and I will see you next time, Polaris.